Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Roven. I'm a Los Angeles personal injury attorney, and today I'm going to be discussing with you what is pain and suffering and what are factors that affect pain and suffering. Pain and suffering is a somewhat nebulous concept. It essentially means the pain and suffering that a person endured after an accident that they're entitled to from the person who caused the injury. Pain and suffering is not really an exact science when it comes to calculating it. It more turns into something what a person can argue as to how much someone's pain and suffering is worth. Oftentimes it's left to the jury to decide what the pain and suffering value truly is. A person who suffered an accident is generally entitled to past pain and suffering, the pain and suffering that they've already endured prior to a settlement or some kind of judgment or verdict, and then future pain and suffering, the pain and suffering that a person is going to endure in the future because of their injury. So generally speaking, personal injury attorneys will use mortality tables to determine how much longer a person is going to live and how much pain and suffering that person is going to endure. So a younger person who is going to have lifelong injuries is going to have more pain and suffering value than an older person who's going to have lifelong injuries, simply because the younger person will likely live longer than the older person. The first factor that affects pain and suffering is the actual pain that a person endured. As we all know, certain types of injuries hurt more than others. If a person's in a car accident and suffers whiplash injuries such as a sore back or a sore neck, then that's going to be worth a lot less than a person who suffered broken bones. Someone who is only going to need a few physical therapy visits probably endured a lot less pain than someone who needs surgery. In soft tissue cases where a person endures sore back or sore neck, their pain and suffering value is generally going to be a lot less than hard tissue injuries such as broken bones. 2 quick tips to increase the value of a person's pain and suffering is 1, take pictures of the injuries as they progress. You want to have a lot of evidence as to your actual injuries, and 2, to keep a journal of the pain and suffering that you are enduring, how it is affecting your life, affecting your relationships, affecting your ability to participate in certain hobbies that you like, those things. The second factor that affects pain and suffering is what's called emotional distress. How much emotional distress is a person experiencing because of the injury caused by another person? Are they feeling sad, lonely, depressed, because they're not able to do the things that they once loved? Perhaps someone is an avid bike rider but can no longer ride bikes because of the accident that they suffered. This is going to play into pain and suffering damages. A person that's suffering more severely from an emotional basis may have more pain and suffering damages. 1 quick tip for increasing emotional distress damages is to seek psychological help, whether it be a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, and report to them all of the emotional distress that you are feeling. That way they can document it in their medical reports and you can turn it over to the insurance company to get more for your pain and suffering. A third factor that plays into the value of pain and suffering is the amount of the medical bills. The amount of the medical bills is generally what a person has already paid, what an entity has paid on their behalf, and how much they owe in the future. A person is not entitled in the state of California to exactly how much the provider billed for, but they're only allowed to recover the amount that they themselves paid, their insurance paid, someone else paid, and how much they owe in the future. So keeping that in mind, if a person has $5,000 in medical bills, then their pain and suffering may generally be less than a person who has, say, $50,000 in medical bills. A fourth factor that affects pain and suffering value is loss of consortium. This is typically a spouse's claim. If a spouse is suffering their own emotional distress because of a victim's injuries, then the spouse can recover for things like loss of love, loss of companionship, loss of intimacy. Those types of damages tend to have value, and those can affect pain and suffering damages. But on the flip side, if a person's injuries is causing them to have loss of love, loss of companionship, and loss of intimacy, then they themselves can put that as an added factor into their pain and suffering calculation. A fifth factor that affects pain and suffering damages is the nature and the extent of the injuries. This was touched on a little bit when we were discussing our first factor of actual pain, but it differs in just a few very important ways. The actual pain that a person is suffering is different than what their injuries are. For example, what a person is suffering today, let's say in their knee, may not feel like that they're going to need surgery, when in fact a doctor may say, you need to have surgery. So that's different than what a person is feeling and what their actual injury is. Another example is when a person suffers soft tissue injuries, but they're not really feeling the full extent of their pain right away. However, they have suffered, for example, a herniated disc. That is going to affect the nature and extent of their injuries. A person that suffered less severe injuries, like whiplash injuries, is going to have less pain and suffering than a person who suffered more severe injury, like broken bones, herniated discs, and things of that nature. A sixth factor that is going to affect a person's pain and suffering damages is the duration of the treatment. So if a person suffers whiplash injuries following a car accident and needs several visits to the chiropractor or physical therapist and just a few visits to an orthopedist, then that is going to have much less value than a person who's injured for the rest of their life and is going to need, let's say, physical therapy for the rest of their life, perhaps many surgeries down the road. That's going to have a much more drastic and higher value pain and suffering than a person with relatively minor injuries. A seventh factor that will affect pain and suffering damages is photographs of property damage. Now you may be asking yourself, what does property damage have to do with a person's pain and suffering? The answer is that when you turn over these types of pictures to the insurance company, they see it as more risk if a jury were to see it later on down the road. If a jury sees a severe impact, then they may feel more inclined to award more. On the alternative side, if you have relatively minor property damage, then an insurance company may not be so inclined to pay more because they're going to say to themselves, well, this type of accident really couldn't have caused this type of injury. Photographs of property damage can play a very emotional role. Insurance companies know this, and competent personal injury lawyers know this as well. Insurance companies generally do not want severe property damage photos getting into the hands of the jury. Otherwise, juries may award more for a person's pain and suffering damages. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have more questions, leave a comment in the comment section below. Please subscribe to these videos. If you want to call me, you can call me anytime. My number is 888-7-JOHNNY-7, 888-7-JOHNNY-7, JONNY. Thanks so much.